They slammed her head into the wall not once, not twice. Again and again until the concrete cracked and her knees hit the floor. They thought that was it, that she'd black out, that the hallway would fall silent, because that's what happens when you ambush someone alone and try to erase them before they even get a chance to speak. But what they didn't know is that Navy SEALs don't just black out. Lieutenant Rena Carter didn't disappear. She didn't crawl. She didn't run. She recalibrated. And when she stood back up, that corridor became a battlefield. Now, before we show you how the entire base changed that day, and what happened when those men tried to lie their way out, hit subscribe and turn on the bell. Drop a comment telling us where you're watching from, and stay right here, because they didn't just pick the wrong target. They picked a SEAL, and she was still awake. The Hollister Combat Annex didn't sleep so much as simmer. Even after taps had sounded, the steel-roofed training bay still buzzed with fluorescent light and the low whine of overhead ventilation. A few drops echoed from a leaking pipe near the far corner. The scent of rust, sweat, and chlorine clung to the air like it had nowhere else to go. Lieutenant Commander Arya Keene sat on the far bench, elbows resting on her thighs, methodically wrapping a tension band around her wrist. The only light above her flickered every third second, long enough to cast her in shadow, then silhouette, then back again. Her boots were still damp from the dive drill earlier. Her jaw was set like concrete. She didn't speak. She rarely did unless a correction was necessary. On most days, even that felt like more than she wanted to give. A cluster of Marines loitered by the gear racks, voices low but not low enough. Sergeant Cole Rourke leaned against a steel column, cheap beer can half concealed in his palm. Corporal Tanner perched on a storage box, lacing and unlacing the same boot. Private Voss leaned on a mop handle he wasn't using. They'd failed Keene's dive timing drill 3 times in a row that week. Not once had she raised her voice. Not once had she shown anger. That only made it worse. "She even blinked down there?" Tanner asked, louder than he needed to be. "Poster SEAL," Rourke muttered. "Only got promoted because she looked good on the brochure." Voss chuckled. "Think she's ever taken a hit? Bet she folds faster than a tent." Arya tightened the wrap. One final tug. The Velcro hissed shut. She stood, adjusted the tension on her bootlaces, then picked up the clipboard beside her and tapped it twice against her palm. Not once did she glance toward them. She walked the length of the annex with the same steady, unhurried stride she used on deck, then disappeared through the far service corridor, the one that led past the supply lockers and out toward the back gate. The flickering light above the Marines finally gave out, buzzing once before dying completely. Behind her, Rourke tipped back the last of his beer and muttered, just loud enough for the others to hear, "Let's see how long she stays conscious next time." None of them laughed. The pipe kept dripping. The air kept humming, and somewhere beyond the steel walls, the base exhaled the last breath of night. Morning haze still clung to the edges of the parade field when Arya called the formation into place. The compound hadn't warmed yet, but sweat already streaked across uniforms. Gravel crunched under boots as recruits and instructors moved into rows. SEAL candidates on one side, Marines on the other. It was a joint endurance circuit. Timed rope climbs, weighted runs, and underwater holds. No one was allowed to fall out. Arya stood at the front, clipboard tucked under one arm, stopwatch in hand. Her expression hadn't changed from the night before. No tension, no emotion, just the quiet, coiled readiness she always wore like a second uniform. "Climb standard is 20 feet, full body clearance. Time starts on contact," she called out. "Failure to hold at summit resets the count." The line shifted. Rourke stepped forward, cocky grin barely contained. He sprinted first, boots hammering up the rope fast, too fast. At the midpoint, his rhythm slipped. He jerked upward, trying to correct. When he hit the top, his grip barely caught. His right leg swung out for balance, but it dipped below the beam before he could lock it. Arya didn't blink. "Fail," she said flatly. "Reset." Rourke slid down hard, his boots thudding into the gravel with a jolt. "You serious?" he snapped, turning back toward her. She raised the clipboard, showed him the stopwatch. "You didn't clear the hold. Do it again. The rope didn't fail. You did." A few of the SEAL candidates behind him exhaled sharp laughter. One even clapped once before cutting it short. Rourke's jaw twitched. You trying to make an example? Arya met his eyes without flinching. Already did. The silence that followed cut deeper than the words. Even the wind stilled for a second. Rourke stormed to the back of the line, seething. Tanner and Voss fell in beside him. No one said a word. Later, in the locker corridor after drills, Arya moved past the rows of dented gray doors without slowing. She carried her gear bag on one shoulder, towel draped over the other. Her hair was still damp from the post-run rinse. She reached her locker, turned the key, and swung the door open. The metal beside her slammed shut. Hard. She didn't flinch. Rourke stood inches away, sweat still drying across his neck, arms stiff. You think I won't hit an officer? He said low. She didn't turn her head, just looked straight ahead and said, calm as ever, you just did, with words. Then she shut the locker slowly, shouldered her gear, and walked off. That night, in the far corner of the base lounge, Rourke stared at a beer bottle without drinking it. Tanner and Voss flanked him, lower-ranking Marines drifting in and out of earshot. The air smelled like old wood, grease, and whatever passed for whiskey in the vending corner. She made you look like a boot, Tanner said, half laughing. In front of a dozen candidates. She didn't even blink, Voss added. That's what pissed me off. Rourke rubbed the back of his neck. The muscle there knotted from the climb. His voice came quieter than either expected. She thinks that silence makes her strong. Tanner leaned in. She needs a lesson. One she won't forget, Voss snorted. What are we gonna do, file a complaint? No, Rourke said. We wait. He stood slowly, tossed his half-full beer in the bin, and cracked his knuckles one by one. She logs the annex every night, same time, 2,200 hours. Tanner and Voss looked at each other, then back at him. They didn't smile. They just nodded. For the next 2 nights, they watched. Not obviously, just close enough. Rourke positioned himself near the equipment bay exit at 21:45, pretending to inventory gear. Tanner lingered by the water station with a clipboard he wasn't reading. Voss smoked outside the rear gate, timing her route. She was precise, ritualistic even. Every night, same path, main corridor to storage annex, then the maintenance wing. Alone, clipboard in hand. 22 minutes, give or take, 30 seconds. No deviation, no company. On the 3rd night, Rourke didn't watch. He just nodded to the others and said one word: tonight. The base had a rhythm after dark, guard rotations every 40 minutes, security sweeps focused on perimeter fencing, interior checks limited to main facilities. The maintenance corridor sat in a blind spot. Old construction, low priority. The kind of place that only got attention when something broke. Perfect for a conversation no one needed to hear. The maintenance corridor behind the Hollister Annex was the kind of place that swallowed sound. No windows, just a string of flickering bulbs running the length of a concrete tunnel, broken by rows of storage cages and old equipment lockers. Every footstep echoed back like it didn't want to be alone. Arya walked the stretch quietly, clipboard in hand, checking padlocks and tagging defective gear. Her breath came even, measured, routine. Last inspection of the night. She stopped at the final storage bay, signed off the inventory sheet, and was turning to leave when she heard it. Boots scuffing against the floor, a scrape too heavy to be wind or pipes. Then a voice. Evening, Commander. Got a minute? Rourke. She half turned, keeping her shoulder against the wall. Her silhouette cut through the dull yellow light, one hand still holding the clipboard like she hadn't decided whether to set it down or not. He stepped out of the shadows, 2 shapes behind him, Tanner and Voss, flanking like bodyguards. Their eyes gleamed glassy from alcohol and adrenaline. Arya's tone stayed flat. You're off duty, Sergeant. Rourke smiled, lazy. Relax. We just came to apologize. She didn't answer. She didn't trust people who led with smiles. He closed the distance 1 step at a time until she could smell the whiskey on his breath. Don't look so tense, he said softly. We're just having a conversation. Then his hand moved too fast to stop. A fistful of hair. A yank backward, skull meeting steel, first slam. The sound was hollow, shocking. Metal vibrated under impact. Her knees buckled, but she stayed upright on instinct, one palm catching the wall. Second. The world flashed white. Skin split above her temple. Warmth spilled down into her eye. Tanner laughed from the side, nervous, high-pitched. Guess seals do bleed. Third. He twisted her slightly before driving her head sideways this time, her temple clipping a locker hinge hard enough to send sparks across her vision. For a second, she didn't know which way was up. Everything blurred. But her body refused to fold. She dropped to a knee, breathing shallow through blood and static. Boots circled her. The corridor reeked of sweat and liquor. Rourke let go, shaking his hand like she'd burned him. "Lesson delivered," he muttered. Tanner kicked the clipboard. Papers fanned across the floor like snow. Voss lingered a second longer, watching her head droop forward. "She's out cold," he said. Rourke grunted. "Good. Maybe she'll learn to stay quiet, where she belongs." Then they turned. Their laughter trailed off toward the exit, until only the echo remained. For several long seconds, there was nothing. Just the hum of the ceiling lights and the slow drip of condensation from a cracked pipe above. Then a breath, one, then another. Arya's hand twitched. She pressed her palm flat to the floor, tried to push herself up. Her body protested, knees shaking, balance fractured. Her vision pulsed, the edges dark. But her heartbeat was steady, still there, still awake. She reached for the wall, used it to stand, head pressed against the cool concrete for balance. Blood trickled from her hairline to her collar. Her voice came out in a whisper no one would ever hear. Still conscious, she spat the metallic taste from her mouth, tore the sleeve from her undershirt, and pressed it against the wound. Then she looked down the empty corridor, the flickering bulbs stretching out like a runway. Every light hummed, every shadow still. She took a single step, then another, limping slightly, breathing slow through her nose, the blood drying sticky along her cheek. Outside, the rain had begun again, light, cold, relentless. She stepped into it without flinching, let it run down her face, washing the red into the gravel. At the far end of the yard, a guard tower light swept once across the lot, catching her silhouette for a heartbeat before it moved on. Arya adjusted her collar, straightened her shoulders, and walked into the dark. No shouts, no alarms, no witnesses, only the quiet rhythm of her boots fading into the storm, and the low murmur of a woman still standing when she shouldn't have been able to. The barracks washroom was empty, just echoes and cold tile under flickering fluorescent light. Arya stood over the sink, her shirt collar soaked, her sleeve wrapped tight across the side of her head. Blood had dried along the seam of her temple and jawline. Some of it had reached her throat before congealing. She didn't flinch at the sting. She didn't lean on the sink. Her stance was the same as it always was. Square, centered, unmoved. She unwrapped the sleeve slowly, then turned on the tap. Cold water rushed out. She cupped it, let it spill over the cut without blinking. Red swirled briefly in the basin before fading into clear. There was no mirror, just a rusted frame where one used to be. That suited her fine. She pulled a small bottle of rubbing alcohol from her duffel and poured it directly over the wound. No towel, no cotton, no hesitation. The pain pulsed behind her eyes like a slow drumbeat, but her hands stayed steady. The skin was torn just above the temple, but not deep enough for stitches. She dabbed it with a gauze pad, then wrapped a fresh strip of field dressing around her head. Tight, angled low enough to hide under her hairline. Clean, functional, silent. Her reflection in the chrome faucet stared back. Pale eyes, flat expression, jaw locked. Not fury, not shame, just readiness. She dried her hands. The blood had stained her fingertips. She left it. Back in her bunk, the lights were already off across the row. The barracks breathed its usual nighttime silence. Snoring, boots clunking off racks, soft creaks of old beds under restless weight. She sat up straight against the concrete wall, legs stretched, clipboard on her lap, the same one they'd kicked across the corridor floor. From her side pouch, she pulled a small voice recorder, clicked it on, leaned close. 22:03 hours, 3 Marines, Corridor B, still conscious, still breathing. She let the silence sit for a second, then clicked it off. She didn't save it. She deleted the file, not because it didn't matter, but because it wasn't for them. It was for her, and she'd already memorized it. By 0430, she was up again. Same routine. Same posture, same uniform, clean, pressed, precise, the bandage hidden beneath her hairline. She walked across the gravel with the same silent gait. No one noticed the limp. She didn't give it time to show. At the dive annex, she keyed in early, reset the dummy weights herself, recalibrated the timers, adjusted the rescue pool's current settings by a fraction, everything down to the second. A junior recruit passed her near the rack, slowing when he noticed the gauze strip under her bun. "You all right, ma'am?" She looked up, not cold, but still. "Slept wrong on my face," she said. He nodded, half nervous, and walked on. By the time sunrise touched the roof, word had already spread she was back, and that she was fine, which, for the three who hit her, was much worse than hearing otherwise. By noon, the assignment roster was up, white sheet, black ink, posted center mass on the dive bay's corkboard, ***, joint endurance circuit, mandatory ***, lead instructor, Lieutenant Semder A. Keene. Format: mixed unit time-restricted drills pairing assigned by rank. Rourke's name was dead center, Tanner and Voss just beneath it. He squinted at the paper, then scoffed. "She's leading? After yesterday?" Tanner leaned in. "Maybe she's trying to prove she's fine." Voss muttered, "Then we prove she isn't." Across the compound, Keene stood by the edge of the flooded training pit, adjusting a metal sled's resistance level. Her movements were deliberate, exact, mechanical. No one saw her glance toward the corkboard, but she knew every name on it. By 12:30, 24 Marines and SEAL candidates lined the perimeter of the training yard. Sunlight glared off the corrugated tin walls. The air was sharp with bleach, sweat, and tension. Keene walked out with her clipboard tucked beneath one arm. Tactical shades covered the side of her temple, the bandage beneath nearly invisible, beneath the tight weave of her bun. She didn't call roll, didn't give a speech. Her voice carried low but sharp. "Today's standard is simple. You meet it or you don't wear the uniform." The line stiffened. Pairings are posted. Tasks are stacked. Drill starts in 2 minutes. No banter, no warm-up, just orders. Rourke found himself paired with Tanner. Voss stood in the standby line, watching. The whistle blew. First drill, 250-pound sled drag across the gravel course. Keene timed them all. No one made her repeat scores. She called them once, loud enough for the yard to hear. Tanner and Rourke, 322, fail. Rodriguez and Hahn, 259, pass. Second drill, dummy extraction from the flooded pit. Rescue simulation, 0 visibility, 2-person lift. Tanner slipped. Rourke overshot the dummy's weight center. They surfaced off balance, clock ticking past 3 minutes before the dummy hit the platform. Keene watched without expression. 305, fail. Rourke slammed the dummy's leg into the deck on the way out, muttering curses. By the third event, sandbag carry through obstacle weave, Tanner was cramping. Rourke cursed under his breath as he clipped a pipe and dropped his payload. 226, fail. No emotion from Keene, no commentary, just her pen checking the clipboard. Behind the line, a few SEAL candidates exchanged glances. One muttered to another, barely audible, "She's not giving them anything." "That's the point," his partner replied. "Standard's the standard." Fourth drill, underwater equipment recovery. 60 seconds to locate and surface with a weighted pack from 12 feet down. No goggles, no marker buoys. Rourke and Tanner suited up, dropped in together. The water was murky, intentionally so. Chlorine and deliberate sediment made visibility nearly 0. They surfaced at 73 seconds. No pack. Fail. Next pair. 2 SEAL candidates went next. Surfaced at 41 seconds. Pack secured. The difference wasn't subtle. It was surgical. And everyone watching knew it. From the edge of the yard, Master Chief Callahan stood with arms crossed, observing. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. He'd been running drills for 16 years and could spot competence from 100 yards. He also knew when someone was being tested and when someone was doing the testing. His eyes tracked Keen's movements, the way she timed, the way she corrected without emotion. Then he looked at Rourke, noted the tension in his shoulders, the way his jaw worked after every call. Callahan didn't intervene, he just watched, and made a mental note. At the final circuit, Rourke lost composure. He stalked toward her, face flushed, breathing hard. "You setting me up? These times aren't real." She looked up, slowly removing her shades. "The standard is the same for everyone. No one's making time." "I did." She handed her clipboard to a trainee without breaking eye contact. Walked straight to the platform, wearing boots, wearing full gear, stepped into the pool. The yard fell silent. She dove. 32 seconds later, she surfaced with the dummy balanced across her chest, pushed it onto the platform, and climbed out. No struggle, no shouting, just motion. Water poured off her uniform as she took the clipboard back. 2:18, she said aloud. "Reset the clock." No one spoke. Even Voss, watching from the edge, dropped his arms. Keen turned toward the group, voice measured. "No setup, just performance." Rourke didn't answer. Couldn't. His anger had curdled into something quieter, something cold. He stared at her the way a man does when the power dynamics flipped, and he's the only one who doesn't know what comes next. And that silence? That landed harder than the failure ever could. The air in the locker bay was always heavy, steam from the adjacent showers, sweat baked into tile grout. The quiet hiss of old plumbing that never fully shut off. It was evening now, the drills had ended, the yard had emptied. Only the wet floors and fogged mirrors remained. Rourke waited by the far row, towel over one shoulder, posture loose but alert. Tanner leaned against the opposite wall, stretching his shoulder, like he was warming up for a fight. Voss paced near the sinks, not speaking. They weren't laughing anymore. Arya walked in like she hadn't noticed them. Boots squeaked slightly on the wet floor. Her gym shirt clung to her frame, sleeves rolled, towel slung over her neck. Hair tied tight, bandage still tucked out of sight. She didn't flinch. She didn't change course. She opened her locker. Rourke stepped forward and let the words go like he'd been holding them in all day. "You enjoy making us look stupid." She didn't look at him. "Didn't need my help." He moved faster than before. One arm reached for her shoulder in a sharp shove, trying to jam her backward into the row of lockers behind her. But this time, she wasn't caught off guard. She pivoted into the motion, gripped his wrist mid-shove, and turned her hip. In one fluid step, his body rotated, his own momentum redirected straight into steel. First slam! The side of his face hit the same locker he'd backed her into the night before. He stumbled, stunned. Second, she pivoted again, redirected his shoulder against the hinge. Third, with her forearm locked behind his head, she drove him into the exact same spot again. Rourke dropped to one knee, dazed. Tanner lunged with a growl, arm cocked. Arya ducked under the swing, swept his leg with her shin, and slammed her elbow into his sternum as he fell. He hit the floor flat, groaning, breath knocked clean out. Voss hesitated. Too long. He moved for her shoulder, trying to grab, but she turned inside the motion, took his wrist, and redirected him hard against the bench. He landed spine first, pinned under her knee. Silence. 3 men on the tile, steam hissing from the showers nearby. Her breathing was steady, just slightly elevated. Like a warm-up, not a fight. Footsteps echoed in from the hallway. An MP rounded the corner, clipboard in hand, pausing in the doorway. He saw them, 3 down, 1 standing. Arya didn't even turn. "Everything okay in there, Commander?" She glanced over her shoulder, calm as a parked truck. They slipped. The MP stared for a second longer, then nodded. "Watch your step." He kept walking, never broke stride. Arya let go of Voss's wrist, stood and stepped over Tanner. She grabbed her towel, wiped sweat from her jaw, and started unlacing her boots. No adrenaline, no victory, just routine, just correction. The next morning, Master Chief Callahan appeared at her office door. He didn't knock, didn't salute, just stood in the frame with a folder under one arm and an expression that gave nothing away. "Commander," Arya looked up from her desk. "Chief?" MP filed an incident observation last night. Locker Bay, 3 Marines. No injuries requiring medical. She didn't blink. They slipped. That's what the report says. He stepped inside, closed the door quietly, set the folder on her desk, but didn't open it. It also says you were present, alone, after hours. I was changing after drills. Callahan's jaw shifted slightly. Not a smile, not disapproval, just acknowledgement. Base commander asked me to review patrol patterns. Turns out the maintenance corridor's been under-monitored for weeks. We're fixing that. Increased rotation, better lighting. You won't be walking those halls solo anymore. Arya held his gaze. She understood what he wasn't saying, that someone had connected dots, that the bruises on Rourke's face didn't match the story. That slipping doesn't usually happen to 3 men at once. Appreciated, Chief. He nodded once. You've got the advanced combat instruction slot. Starts Monday. Orders came down this morning. Permanent assignment. He turned to leave, paused at the door. For what it's worth, Commander, some lessons stick better when they're delivered the right way. Then he walked out. The folder stayed on her desk. She opened it after he left. Inside, her new instructor certification. Signed by the base commander. Dated today. No ceremony. No announcement. Just recognition delivered the way she preferred it. Quietly. Officially. Final. The mess hall smelled like burnt eggs and overused coffee grounds. Trays clattered. Boots scuffed tile. Somewhere in the back, someone laughed too loud at a joke no one else heard, but the volume was lower than usual. The conversations more clipped. Heads tilted subtly toward one corner of the room. Arya sat alone. Same table she always used, same side of the bench, oatmeal, black coffee, one boiled egg untouched. Her hair was pulled back tight, not a strand out of place. The edge of the gauze dressing still peeked under one side, barely noticeable unless you knew where to look. She ate slowly, calm, silent. Across the hall, Rourke walked in with a slight limp, a welt blooming just under his collarbone. His lip was split, eyes swollen. Tanner followed behind, holding his ribs like breathing hurt. Voss brought up the rear, slower than both. The moment they crossed the threshold, the chatter shifted. Some stopped mid-sentence, others turned fully around. No one laughed this time. The 3 Marines paused just inside the room, trays in hand, scanning for a spot to sit. No one moved, no one offered. They kept walking, quiet now, lowered heads, avoiding her table like it radiated heat. Arya didn't even look up. She brought her coffee to her lips, drank. A group of younger SEAL candidates sat along the side wall. One of them leaned forward, eyes wide, whispered, "That's her," his friend replied, voice low. 3 of them, flattened. Thought she was out cold. Guess not. Another added, almost reverent, "That's what staying conscious looks like." The words traveled, room to room, hallway to hallway. By noon, the phrase was floating across the yard, scribbled in notebooks, repeated near lockers. Even the instructors stopped using her name. They just said the one they shouldn't have touched. Back at her table, Arya finished her coffee. She wiped her tray clean with one folded napkin, stood, moved without a sound. No one blocked her path. No one dared. That corridor would never feel the same again. Same flickering overhead bulb. Same maintenance pipe rattle in the walls. Same line of lockers stretching toward the end where the exit light flickered. But now there was something permanent in the air. Like powder after a detonation. Like silence with a memory burned into it. Arya stood in the middle of the hallway, arms folded, boot planted just beside the skid mark where her head had hit the wall 2 nights before. She faced the other end, waiting. She wasn't scheduled here, had no reason to be standing watch, but it didn't matter. Some things don't require orders, only resolve. A door creaked open behind her. Rourke stepped out first, flanked by Tanner and Voss. Their gaits were slower today, shoulders pulled in tighter. They saw her and stopped. There was no smirk, no nod, no pretend bravado. Just 3 men who remembered exactly how they'd underestimated a woman they thought would fold like paper. Rourke's jaw worked like he wanted to say something. Regret, maybe, or something dressed up like apology. But he didn't. He just turned left and walked away. Tanner followed, keeping his eyes down, one hand still at his ribs. Voss lingered, long enough for Arya to turn her head just slightly. Not to confront, not to provoke, just to let him know she remembered. He flinched at that, an involuntary twitch, and then followed the others, disappearing down the stairs. Arya turned back toward the wall, the spot where they'd shoved her skull. It was clean now, wiped down by some night janitor who had no idea what had happened there. But the dent in the paint still showed. A faint scuff in the shape of a boot's heel was still embedded in the metal corner of the locker behind it. She looked at it for a moment, just long enough, then walked forward, step by step, down the same corridor, past the scene, past the lockers, past the invisible line where she had fallen and where she had stood again. At the end of the hallway, a junior Marine stood holding a clipboard, eyes darting between her and the paper like he didn't know whether to salute or move. Arya passed him. He froze, then said under his breath, almost involuntarily, "Ma'am." She didn't respond, just kept walking. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky had cleared. The bass hummed its usual low rhythm, trucks idling, boots on concrete, voices carrying across open air. Arya stepped into the morning light, adjusted the collar of her jacket, and headed toward the training yard. Same stride, same silence, same resolve, because the corridor had already proven what it needed to. And she didn't need to stand there anymore. The story was written, the line was drawn, and everyone on base knew exactly where it was. How would you have handled what Arya faced? Would you have waited or fought back in the moment? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Subscribe for more stories like this and share this video if it left you thinking, because this wasn't about revenge. This was about knowing exactly when to stand and never flinching when it's time.